So I know we got a small crowd, but the content is very rich. So we do want to get through it and make sure that you have the opportunity to speak on it. And, we want to make sure that we recognize your time too. So typically these take us an hour, and Erica is on the call, but she is traveling. So I know she's listening, but we always give ourselves a round of applause when we can squeeze it in an hour and not go over your time, because we know it's tough. So again, welcome to our April coaching session. If you can, please go ahead and rename yourself with your first and last name, or what you prefer to be called, and then also your district. It does help sometimes when we get into those breakout rooms. And this is how to do so. Again, you just go down and find your name and click rename, and then you can go ahead and just edit that. So our grounding role today, our theme is trauma-informed practices. And one thing that I wanted to do for that check-in was more of a grounding moment. So especially with just the speed that schools are now, especially late in April, as you're finishing up testing, it seems like you're just constantly on go from the start all the way for the next couple of weeks. So the activity, and feel free to borrow this with your own meetings. One grounding technique that we've learned is this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And basically it is one to just kind of center yourself to being in the present moment. But I'm going to extend this a little bit more, because maybe where you are, maybe that can be a spot that might be a little triggering or maybe anxious filled. But I try to pick some spots here that may be a little less stressful. So the goal would be to pick any of these 4 locations, whether that's the beach, I put a Guardians game in there, coffee shop, a path in the woods, anything like that. And we would take time to, do our 5 senses. So the first thing you would do is, whether eyes open or closed, is think about, if I'm in this setting, if I'm at the beach, what are 5 things that I can see? So as we're going through this, go ahead and practice this. All right. So 5 things that you can see in your particular setting, and 4 things that you can touch. 3 things that you can hear. What are 2 things that you can smell? And then 1 thing that you can taste. And then we kind of gather back, and if we wanted to, we could share out maybe your particular spot. Does anyone have a particular place that is relaxing to them on this document here?
I was feeling the beach, Brian.
Yeah, good. It's coming.
So was I. I was feeling the beach too.
All right. I think I probably get lost in the woods. Tom, I don't know where you would be, but I feel like I'd find you there.
Yeah, you know what? The woods would be great, but for what how the Guardians are playing, I'm very interested in getting down to a Guardians game.
There we go. Best record in the league right now. So feel free. This is a great grounding technique that we use for not only our staff meetings sometimes, but that we're seeing some schools use with kids to de-escalate some situations. So yeah, thanks for participating with that. And today's presentation will be here, and I will make sure I drop it in the chat as well, so you all can have it. That should come up right now. I know the date is, well, actually the date is correct on that because we had to reschedule. So, but yeah, so a few housekeeping things. So if you missed last month's session, it was on restorative practices. We had Parma that was speaking on what they did in their buildings, and it was a very good conversation that we had. So there's a link that you can watch that session, but also if you registered last month, you should have got an email from me I believe it was after spring break, so it might have been early April that I sent that out. But just recapping everything, so it is all captured there, but also in our warehouse, we do have some of this information as well. Again, here is our team, and you'll see some of us on the call today from the ESC consultants to the SST. And again, just our mission that we want to build capacity throughout the region and share resources and provide rich discussions about best practices within our region. Right. Today's flow, we're going to go through this. That was the welcome. We're going to do a quick TFI focus item. And then we have the privilege of having Tom Hanachek here, who's our regional field coordinator, who's going to talk about our trauma-informed practices. We'll have a discussion piece following that, and then we'll dive into some of the culturally responsive considerations regarding trauma-informed practices, and then we'll get you with the updates for regional and state, and then get you out of here by 10 o'clock, right? That's the goal. So a few things regarding the alignment to the TFI. And I know that's been a focus this whole year for our network. And this document, this is linked to the PowerPoint. So if you click on that, it will actually get you to the PDF. You might have to download it from PBIS apps, but basically it's talking about how do you integrate trauma-informed approaches in the actual framework of PBIS. And so there are some considerations that we do have. And one starts with our matrix and knowing that, hey, how can I tie this in regarding the language that is appropriate for our kids? So here's an example of one matrix that is including the trauma-informed approach. And you'll see that all the way to the right side. So when I feel upset, these are the things that I can do in a respectful way, organizing, achieving, and then being responsible. So ask for breaks, express feelings by making I statements. Again, these are throughout that document. So having consideration of trauma-informed practices within the matrix is a big step for a lot of districts. We typically see just the, hey, this is how we do it, without this lens of trauma-informed. And then also the other piece that we have is regarding for teachers and staff expectations. We know we focus a lot on students and behavior. However, we know that a lot of the outcomes live with our adults and how we're implementing the framework. So on here is another piece. We've seen some districts and some schools have expectations for teachers and staff, which is great. This is taking it one step further regarding trauma-informed practices. That document's really good. And I think that as you go through and if you explore that, there are some other examples. We do want to highlight that the TFI 3.0 is coming up, and some of the language in there's going to be an increased focus on equity and mental health in the PBIS framework. So that is something to consider as we move forward. And so this is where I'm going to do like a little plug for the TFI 3.0. It's in the validation phase. It's in regards to potentially getting out to everyone soon, but they need participants. So I believe if you click on the actual pictures of this, it will take you to a page in which you can sign up your building, and you would be entered into helping get 3.0 validated for Ohio. So the goal is that it's going to be more comprehensive in regards to the equity and mental health phases of this, and that there's some important initiatives. They're doing a research study, so they want to make sure that it is validated through practice. And I'll highlight this too at the end of the presentation as well, in case you miss it now. but that is kind of our TFI focused item review there. Tom, is there anything before we get to your part regarding the TFI that I might have missed?
Yeah, no, thanks, Brian. I think the one thing that I think is super exciting is through this validation study process, if you as a building are a part of the validation study process, you will have early access to the Ocali has created PBIS learning modules that are actually the future of what professional development will look like in the state. And so if you participate in the validation study, which really requires you to just do a TFI, which you've probably already done, and then sit down with your team and do a TFI 3.0, it doesn't matter what your scores are. It just matters that you do it. That means that you are a part of the validation. And then you would then have access to these Ocali modules. You'd have early access. Districts won't have access to these Ocali modules until probably like September, October at the earliest. But you would have access to them, pre-access to them, to provide for your staffs, your teachers as a resource.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And with that, I'm going to introduce Tom as he's going to be highlighted for our spotlight regarding trauma-informed practice. Tom is our regional field coordinator for the ESC, which covers regions 2, 3, 4, and 5. Am I correct with that, Tom? All right, nice.
Right.
Many titles. Hopefully you've worked with Tom. If not, great resource. And this is something that's, I think I would say, near and dear to his heart regarding trauma-informed practices, as he spent some time as a school psychologist and administrator, as well as an art therapist. So without further ado, Tom, it's all you. Hopefully I gave you a decent introduction there.
Yeah, no, you're too kind, Brian. Yeah, no, thanks. So like Brian's totally right. I got into the field of education as a second career, kind of. I'm a clinician. I was trained as an art therapist, and I worked as an art therapist for over 25 years. The majority of my work as an art therapist was very focused specifically on trauma. I worked with families, children and families that were fleeing domestic violence. And so, as I got into the field of education, the parallel tracks of being a clinician and then being a school psychologist and then being an administrator, it was like I'm able to kind of see this trauma-informed approach through multiple lenses. And so it's I don't know, it became super exciting to me when we started having conversations about trauma in schools, because we were having conversations decades ago in the clinical world, and we always talked about how this is such an enormous impact in the schools. So yeah, I'm super happy to be able to talk about this with you all. So here's what I'm hoping to accomplish. I thoroughly enjoy the opportunity to share ideas for you to reflect on in your practice. And so that's my ask for today. I'm going to kind of share some resources, some ideas, some things to reflect on. And I want you to, while I'm doing it, I want you to think about the statement as with trauma-informed practices, the idea of all of us need to feel safe and believe that we belong. Because I will attest, I think that is more than anything the heart of what trauma-informed practices is all about. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as I share resources, as I go through things. But to start, I have a question, and there aren't too many of us on this call, so you can feel free to unmute or use the chat. I want you to think about is if you're driving to work, 5 days a week, and it's almost May. And what if I said to you that during the month of May, on your commute to work, you're going to get into 5 car accidents? I can't tell you how severe they're going to be. I can't tell you when they're going to happen, but they are going to happen. What are you going to do? How does that affect your how you feel? And then what decisions would you make? How would you do things differently?
You're gonna be anxious all the time.
You're gonna be anxious all the time. Absolutely.
You'd be afraid to drive to work because you don't know if
Uh-huh.
this is the day.
So what would you do?
Maybe not go.
Maybe you'd skip out. Maybe you just say, I'm just not gonna. I'd be walking. Yeah, great. Anything else?
Maybe see if you could work from home if that was an option.
Right? Look at your adapt. Look to see if we can kind of like avoid. Yep. I like to ask this question in some of the professional development sessions I do about trauma, because it relates to how we need to think about people that are experiencing trauma maybe outside of the school, but then also sometimes school can be traumatic. And so like if you think about like how I'll just use an example of domestic violence, often misunderstood, that like that's very much what it feels like, is that you know something bad is going to happen and you're hypervigilant to, you don't know when. And I often will say to people sometimes, and this isn't unreasonable to think about, sometimes if you can control it, if you know you're going to get five accidents, why not just get them all done real quick? Like some people might decide to actually cause the accidents so that they can just get them over with. They can control the severity if they cause them, and they control them, and they can control when they happen. So it takes out the unpredictability. And so like we're looking to avoid, perhaps we're looking to adapt. We're always in a state of like, what do I do? Because something bad's going to happen. And when I think about trauma, that's very much what is happening, and it affects relationships, it affects regulation, it affects your ability to learn. Okay, so thank you for responding to that question, relating to the idea that if you're experiencing some degree of trauma and you're hypervigilant, you have to be able to feel safe and believe that you belong before you can do anything productive. Okay, so if you're constantly waiting for the accident to happen, if somebody comes up to you and says, you're safe, I've got you, I'll protect you, no matter what happens, no matter how you feel, I'm here with you, that has a significant impact. Your actions, all of your actions as an adult, are important for brains that are prioritizing survival. And I will say this, sometimes the adults' brains are prioritizing survival also. So dysregulated adults can help to regulate children. So this important caveat is we have to figure out ways that we can feel safe and feel like we belong. So that's hard, because what does learning feel like? Learning in and of itself requires struggle, so learning and how it is that we teach pedagogy, how it is that we are challenging brains to learn, can create some degree of discomfort. Learning has discomfort. There's dissonance there. If you're really kind of having high rigor of learning, you're like trying to balance things that are in conflict. You're trying to synthesize and understand things that don't maybe make sense in the same space together. Really high level learning requires that. And so a lot of what we do in schools is it's difficult to have like a trauma informed lens, because we're trying to create struggle with learning, and at the same time we're trying to envelop it with care and belonging. So it's almost like, like you're gonna say, okay, this is gonna be hard. For some of you, harder than others. One of my pet peeves in learning and teaching is when people say, this is easy, you got this. Please take the this is easy out of your vocabulary when it comes to learning, because what's easy for you is not easy for someone else. So just saying that can be like, oh my God, they're not with me in my learning. They don't understand me. And so like learning can be a challenge. So I like to reference the work of Maslow. We know Maslow for his hierarchy of needs, you know, but Maslow did a lot of research, tons of research and tons of writing that we tend to overlook because his hierarchy is so emphasized. But one of the things that he talks about and he emphasizes also is the role of the teacher, the parent, and the therapist. He's very explicit about saying that these three roles have significant impact on learning, on growth, on human development. Oh, is there a way to turn on captions? Absolutely, there should be. If we're in presentation mode, I should be able to.
Let me see. I'll try and see if I have something on my end.
Okay, if you can turn on captions, Brian, and want to share, I'll unshare, and then we can actually put your slide deck on, okay? So just let me know. We're on it. All right. So Maslow talks about the role of these three, the teacher, the parent, the therapist, as being super, super important. And what he references is that they each should think of themselves as horticulturists. Maslow was an incredibly creative writer. He liked to use metaphor. And he makes the statement that as a teacher, a parent, and a therapist, we need to make a rose into a good rose. If we're a horticulturist for humans, just like a horticulturist is for plants, we need to make a rose into a good rose rather than to seek to change roses into lilies. So oftentimes learning can be traumatic and can affect students' ability to learn if we're constantly trying to expect them to be something they're not. Okay. And this again is enveloped in that challenge of learning is struggle. But we have to remember, as educators, as parents, and as therapists, it's our job to help the roses become beautiful, healthy roses, not to change them. So this is an important caveat that I like to bring to the table that I think is super important for trauma-informed practices. I think in education, we oftentimes expect assimilation. We expect students to become different flowers, if that makes sense. And that can be traumatic. So think about that relative to that statement of all of us need to feel safe and we believe that we belong. If we're looking in the mirror and we feel like we're a rose and somebody's trying to change us into a lily, how does that affect our safety and our belonging? So we're going to take a few minutes and we're going to listen to Bruce Perry now, and he's going to talk about like discipline, because I think it's very relatable. And I'm actually going to play this and I'm going to fast forward the first 30 seconds and he's going to start talking about discipline in school and in the classroom.
So one of the biggest challenges in education is in the whole area of discipline. And in my mind, discipline is related to the biology of reward and the biology of distress. And it's interesting to me that, by and large, when you are criticized or when you do something wrong, or when you are publicly given a consequence, shamed or disciplined, or suspended, or excluded from the class, or from recess for some activity, it is not a positive experience, right? And so here's what we know about the brain and its capacity to learn when you feel distressed. It can't learn. And so the crazy, the mind-blowing crazy thing about this is that how do you think that shaming or punishing somebody is going to make it easier for that person to learn? It's crazy. It does the exact opposite of what you are theoretically trying to achieve. If you want somebody to learn something, as we've said a lot, they need to feel safe. They need to feel like they belong. You don't extrude them, you don't exclude them, you don't shame them, you don't punish them, and then say, now learn algebra. The fundamental of contingency-based practices yoked to learning is ridiculous. Contingency-based programs were never intended to teach new concepts. Contingency-based programs in animal models and in human models basically reinforce existing internalized content. In other words, stuff you've already learned. Now, the good news is that there are ways that you can take advantage of the biology of the brain, take advantage of the neurobiology of reward and regulation, and understand stress and distress, and create environments where there is order, where there is accountability, where there is responsibility, all the things that we want to help people develop as children and young adults. So some of my favorite are practices that use a community engagement model, like restorative justice practices, or practices that take advantage of this inherently biologically powerful relational process of collaborating, like collaborative problem solving. And so when you bring those practices into a school environment, rather than shaming somebody and blaming and excluding, you're bringing somebody back into connection. People are their best when they're in community, when they're connected, when they feel safe, when they feel like they belong. And then they will learn. They can hear you. They can understand the consequences of the behavior. They can think about the future and go, yeah, that wouldn't work. They can reflect on the past and go, oh, that was really stupid. And that's how you change. You don't change by terrorizing somebody into a state of dysregulation where you're basically interacting with someone who's thinking at the level of a rabbit. You know, rabbits are not particularly good thinkers. So the idea that some of these practices are too soft really is I think, false. I think that that's community building. I think that that's giving people a better a chance. I mean, I have seen the consequences of the punishment system in our society. We know that those systems don't work very well, and we have a lot of evidence that when you treat people with respect, when you teach them skills, when you give them opportunities, when you treat them in a respectful, humane way, the probability that they'll be sociopathic and predatory and everything, that it all diminishes. The vast majority of crime and the vast majority of problems that end up being disciplined about in schools are things that are related to fear, to confusion, anger, lack of skills. These are things that are easily repairable if you identify and treat the right thing, as opposed to, or identify and address the correct thing, as opposed to shame, blame, exclude, humiliate. That never, ever leads to good things. Nobody who's been humiliated and shamed and degraded and marginalized ends up as a, that doesn't breed compassion and goodwill and civic engagement and all this, the stuff that we want in a healthy society, you don't get by humiliating people.
Okay, so Dr. Perry just talked a lot about a lot of important things. So we're going to have time to reflect and have a conversation about these here in a few minutes. I want to kind of like use his content and sandwich it in between some things here. So I'm going to share a couple more things that are more practical, and then we're going to have opportunities to break out and have conversations about this, or do it as a large group. So think about the students you work with, and think about the decisions that you make that then relate to their feeling safe and that they belong. And you should explore all avenues of behavior. I created a presentation with Amanda Nowak in our office, and we really talked about how, like, a practical way to frame this is to think that students, even if they are feeling safe, or they're struggling with belonging, you can tie it to either a relationship need of theirs, a need for them to feel like they connect, to feel like they belong, a responsibility need. Being responsible makes you feel like you're part of a group, makes you feel important, or a regulation need, because we all know that unless somebody is regulated, they really have no capacity to learn anything new. So let's look at these three areas from a very practical perspective. And I like to share these slides with teachers, is like common behaviors and actions that these are actions that we see when students are saying, I need to connect, I need a relationship, I need to feel like I belong. They struggle with adult close proximity. They respond well to personal acknowledgement. They have moods that go up and down. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are very practical things that you can talk to teachers about. They're screaming to say, I want to connect. I want to feel like I belong. I want to feel safe in your environment if they're doing these things. And then what are some strategies that teachers can do if students are saying desperately, I need to feel like I belong? Again, and these are things that the teachers do all the time, but it's important to, again, give them sometimes a list and say, if you're seeing these behaviors, these are things that you can and should do to contribute to their feelings of belonging. The responsibility piece, like common behaviors that students display when they want to feel like they want to have a responsibility, they want to be part of a team, is they seek predictability, they crave control. All of these things are telltale signs of students that have responsibility needs. And here are some things that teachers and administrators consider for those students that have that responsibility need. Again, very practical things to think about that you can give to your educators. And then lastly, common behaviors that are evidence of students with a regulation need. So students struggle with transition. They have a hard time being still. They commonly shut down. They might blow up. They flip their lid. And what can you do to help with regulation? Dr. Perry has a great series about the power of rhythm and play in education. Oh my goodness, it would be a whole day presentation to talk about how important integrating rhythm and movement and play, which we've extinguished that in many of our educational settings. And it is so linked to what makes learning engaging, community building, and exciting. So like regulation needs, here's some very specific things that can be done related to regulation. And then as a segue from regulation, again, to think about avenues to frame behavior. I have a strategy that I have used for years, a choice board, but I'm giving this example because it's very effective to do with students that are struggling with a regulation need. That are struggling, but if they have a regulation need, if you don't have a connection with a student, this is going to be completely ineffective. If a student's not feeling safe, or that you are in it with them, this isn't going to work. So it's like you have to think about strategies that you employ. They're almost like they're only going to be effective if they're sitting on a solid foundation of safety and belonging. So a choice board is a visual way to say to students, okay, you did something. And I'll actually sit down and draw this with students. I'll take like a sheet of paper and I'll draw out, okay, you did this. Here's the action. Your action is going to lead somewhere. Within the school system, we have a code of conduct. This is where it leads. But every action has an outcome. But you as a human being always have a decision about a next step. Your next step is really critical. And so what I'll do is I'll just frame it out visually with students. I'm like, what is your next step? You did something. What is your next step? Because you know what? Your next step leads to a different outcome. It does not lead to the same outcome. You have choices. So let's talk about them. What's your next step? Because it's not going to lead to the predicted outcome based on your action. So I love doing this with students. Again, if they're regulated, if they feel safe and they belong and you have a connection with them, this is just a really practical strategy that's very trauma informed, that's rooted in a sense of community and belonging. So I wanted to share that. I wanted to put in some practical ideas for you to kind of also like think about before you went into your sort of discussion or small group reflection groups, which is kind of what we're going to do now. So I just what I did here, and actually I'll stop sharing, is, and Brian can jump back on. What I did is I gave you a lot to think about in a very short period of time. And the whole idea is like, okay, so let's reflect on these things and relate it to the work that we're doing and PBIS. And we have some guiding questions for when we go into discussion groups. And Brian, you got that? That's
Yeah, I'm trying to get back to those slides, but yes, we do have some questions to help you as you are going to be in these smaller breakout groups, and I think that's going to be helpful as we have just these conversations. So let me get right there and share my screen. So when we go into our breakout rooms, we're gonna have some time. We're gonna have about 10 minutes or so to have these conversations. Christina Delaney's on the call, and Tom will also be facilitating the rooms. So it should break you out into equal groups. So basically, we have three kind of questions that kind of go around Tom's presentation. Like, do all students and staff feel safe? Why or why not? Let's take an audit right there. And then also, do they feel like they belong? And then what are the things that you can do to help students feel safe, staff and students feel safe throughout? So I will drop this in the chat as well. And then once we go to our breakout rooms, you will just work with your lead there, and hopefully it works out. Any questions before we do that?
I know it could be a question of clarification of what I shared before we get into discussion. Any question? Okay.
All right, so let me see if this is it. All right, so here are the questions. I'm going to just drop it in the chat, and I'm going to open up the breakout rooms. Tom and Christina, if you guys get sent to the same room, just let me know, and I might be able to see it anyways. So it should pop up on your screen. If not, it might be the three dots at the bottom, and then you just click join your room. All right, maybe it is having you kind of assigned to certain groups. Oh, I'm dropping you over here. So, oh, Paul, if you want to check your screen, you should be able to jump into a room here.
Where do you want me to go, Brian? Oh, break.
Yeah, it's a breakout room. It might pop up on your screen, or if you go down to the three dots, it says more. And you should be able to click on that, and it should say something about breakout rooms or join a breakout room.
Team Tom.
Yep, Team Tom.
All right.
There we go. Welcome back, everyone. I know it's probably a short amount of time in those conversations, but does anyone want to share out maybe some highlights of what was said or what was captured? Feel free to come off mute or you can drop it in the chat, either one. We like hearing people's voices, though.
Well,
I'll speak. Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
I'd say collectively, the group all kind of really had the same mindset. One, it really goes back to the connections, and that's with that adult behavior. A great example, keeping those consistent, predictable, safe environments, which is PBIS in the framework. One building's having a lot of different schedule changes, and coincidentally, right, they're having a big increase in behavior because of that lack of consistency. So it was a great conversation.
Yeah, great point. That's a great point. Thank you, Christina, for sharing that. That predictable and consistent environments are pivotal for that. Paul, did you want to add?
One of the highlights for me was really the trauma-informed practices included on the behavioral matrix, specifically like the teacher expectations. You know, as a student, you may look at that and think, well, this is all about me. What am I supposed to be doing? But having the teacher expectations on there as well informs the student body that, hey, these are things that I should expect out of the staff supporting me.
Yeah.
And, some strategies that could be beneficial to, multiple situations across the school district.
Yeah, it's having that knowing what to expect, and not only from a group of students, but also from staff. Like this is what we're expecting for you to do, and this is how we're going to do so to be successful. So we'll thank you for that, and team, we appreciate those conversations. So as we're winding down, we're going to wrap up. Again, we have the culturally responsive considerations. And so this one, looking into it, the way I kind of looked at it, like how can we be culturally responsive to trauma-informed care is kind of the approach that I was looking at. We always provide this resource. This is a good link between the TFI and the culturally responsive field guide. However, this one was a little limited in regards to our specific topic for this month regarding trauma-informed practices. But there are two really good resources. They're dense, but they have some really high quality information. This one comes from the Institute of Education Sciences, IES, and it's looking at embedding culturally responsive practices into trauma-informed schools. I believe that is linked. But I'll also drop it in and just some notes of it. And it's basically, it's addressing, so how does it live? And it's crucial for addressing racial and historical trauma impacting students. And then it goes into talking about how educators can help dismantle racist practices within schools to provide that supportive environment. All right, along with some other good pieces talking about high quality instructional material, also relevant curriculums. This next one, this one has a lot. And Tom and I were discussing it yesterday and just seeing all the additional resources that it provides from various organizations was huge. Saying that, hey, we didn't audit all of them, but there's a lot of good resources in there. So this is, again, discussing the act of racism and discrimination negatively impacting students' mental health and well-being. So this website, if you go down to the attachment and then you download it, it will also have a PDF that will have a list of different resources that you can use. And we'll probably end up using those resources and probably sprinkle them into the network or for some of the resources as we move forward. All right. I know it's a lot. Any questions with those before we move on to our regional updates? All right. So in these regional updates, we just want to kind of give you the heads up. Like, this has been wild. It's the second to last one. Next month, we're going to talk about next year readiness. Christina's going to be helping present on that. That's going to be May 16th. So as school's winding down, hopefully we can get some of you all attending this PD as we gear up for the summer. And then Christina, this is you.
All right, everybody that's applying for recognition, we are down to it. So looking at the 2024 recognition application timeline visual there, we are in April, almost in May. So right now you should be gathering all your evidence, converting it into PDF or Word doc format, and moving it on into those recognition folders. If you're thinking, I don't know what these folders are, but we are applying, reach out to one of us so that we can make sure we solve that roadblock. Looking at the other document there, we are springtime, even though it's a little chilly, some frost still, right? So complete that TFI with the walkthrough. You can't complete that TFI scoring unless you have that walkthrough completed. So be cognizant of that. Make sure that school profile template is completed and uploaded. And again, if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out. We had our recognition office hours. Those are coming down to an end, but if you, again, have any questions, please reach out to anybody on this call. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And if somehow you're looking if you're the point person for your building or district and you're looking for those folders, check your email from Teresa Richardson, who is our admin assistant here for the SST. So some of the PDs coming up tomorrow and Friday, we have Dr. Heidelberg, who's going to be presenting. Please, 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 if you have the time and availability, come through, listen to him speak. He's a great presenter. And yeah, we're hopefully going to sell out the room. I know it's short notice, but we do have some room available for that. In addition, coming up in June, as things do wind down, and hopefully most buildings will be out, we do have Why Wait Until Next Year, talking about chronic absenteeism and then strategies to prevent this, but also, like, what are you doing with your data? So that's coming up. That should be another good one. Additionally, Erica's on the call, and she last I heard that there were some spots available for her restorative practice classroom. So I'm adding that as well. If not, I'm sure we'll make sure that there's communication there. Kind of exciting piece for this. This is a PBIS interest survey for next year. The idea with this is to gauge your interest regarding next year. What are you interested in? Maybe what are some topics that you're not so interested in? And then potentially, what are you doing within the building or district that we're not seeing or we're not catching right now that could be tied into the PBIS work that we're doing in the region? So it should be pretty quick. I'm going to also post this in the recap email, but also for next month as well, since we have our attendance is a little limited today. So you'll see that a few times. Please fill it out. It gives us feedback on what we're doing and potentially what you want to hear about come next year. Some of the additional PDs coming up. Again, this is all interactive, so you can always grab those registration links there. Always promoting the PBIS Regional Warehouse. Great resource to see what's going on in the region. And then quickly some state updates as we talked about the validation study. That is something, again, early access to those Ocali modules. We're up against it. I got under a minute here. Here is an article that talks about suspensions are pretty vague in regard to defiance and disorderly conduct that are widespread. In Ohio is one of the states that are kind of using this as a matrix. It does have some important pieces to it. So that's a good read. Additionally, there is a school in Denver Public Schools reported a 94% compliance rate with their discipline matrix this year, which is up from 83% from last year. Talking about racial disparities. So this is a good article talking about what this looks like. And then coming to the end here, another resource from PBIS apps. It's a podcast, but it does give you some transcripts that you can look at, but talking about this idea that if these students weren't with us, they always skew our data type of thing. So good there. And additionally, one more thing that we have coming to us in Independence is we have an AI summit. So if you're interested, that is an interactive link that you can click on and attend. Some good stuff that's coming in regards to AI. And then lastly, if you want to, you have the chance to click on that, register for next month. And then also, we do have our survey that we always ask for your feedback. So anything there, again, we'll drop it in the chat. But yes, I know we're going lightning fast here at the end. I owe you a minute. We appreciate your time being on here. If there's any questions, feel free to hang on for a second and we'll get to you. All right. Otherwise, have a great Wednesday. Thanks for being flexible, and we'll see you next month.